Today, I want to talk about stretching or mobility and something that comes up a lot within the athletic way with our athletes, within some of the discussions that we have with some of our community members. But really, what I want to talk about is what about proper stretching or proper mobility? And what I mean by that is that actually some of the stretches or mobility patterns that you're going through may actually be doing more harm than good. And this happens when the stretch or the mobility takes place at the wrong segment or the wrong region. Okay, so unfortunately, again, I think that a lot of us think that stretching is helping us, which many times it will, and hopefully the majority of the time it will. But if we aren't producing that or executing that stretch accordingly and appropriately, then it can actually likely be doing more harm than good because we're actually moving at the segment that we don't want to have moving. Okay, so let's go through a couple of examples to demonstrate this. Okay, and really what we're talking about is we're trying to get what we call proximal stability or stability closer to your trunk while we're then mobilizing or moving or stretching a segment that's a little more distant from the trunk. Okay, and that's proximal stability for distal mobility. Okay, so let's get a really clean example here. So the first one I want to go through is that of our hip flexor. Okay, so many of us feel tight in our hip flexor region, which many of us are. We're either tight or stiff within that region. But then when we go to mobilize that or stretch that, we actually end up moving at the wrong region, the wrong spot. Okay, so this is a common hip flexor stretch position. So half kneeling position. Sometimes we'll have the foot up on a wall or an elevation behind us to get a little more stretch, which is great too. But as I mobilize this, so let me get this arm out of the way for you. If I'm going to move through and try to stretch my hip flexor and my hip region, if I'm going in and out of this position, but I'm going really, really far into it and I'm actually leaning back through my back, what I'm getting now, instead of stretching or mobilizing the tissue of my hip flexor, I'm actually getting a lot of movement through my low back. Okay. So that's actually a compensation, and that can actually drive more pain either into my back, or what ends up happening as well is if I'm going through this pattern and I'm focusing on just pushing my hip as far forward as I possibly can, even though I feel more quote unquote stretch in my hip, what I'm actually getting there a lot of times is what we call an anterior femoral glide. So my femur, the head of my leg bone here, is pushing forward into the capsule. Okay, capsule, all the tendons, all the ligaments, all the kind of stuff that lays in front of that hip. We're actually getting excessive motion of that femur forward, and we're actually impinging those structures in the forward part of our hip here. Okay, so even though it feels like we're getting more stretch, that sensation we're feeling is actually coming out of neutral. So we're not stretching the tissues that we actually want. So what do we want to do? We want to stabilize the stuff around us, and then we want to actually get the tissue of the hip flexor, the quad to open. Okay, so what do we do for that? We think about our hip and our rib cage. Can we keep those guys connected? So I'm staying nice and locked in here. And then when I go to push my hip forward, I'm thinking about squeezing the glute on that side as well. And when I do so, that's about as far forward as I can possibly get. I have this massive stretch through the front of my hip flexor, my quad, and now I'm in a neutral position through my back. So now I'm actually getting the tissue that I'm trying to actually go for. Again, the hip flexor tissue here. So if I do this inappropriately or wrong, if I'm just kind of pushing through this, okay, I'm likely doing more harm than good. I'm going to irritate my back. I'm going to actually irritate the front of my hip. And we're actually trying to stretch out and maybe relieve some pain from the front of the hip or gain some more movement capacity from that. Okay, so let's go through another example. So here's another really common one when somebody tries to stretch their hamstring complex. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple different angles here, but first one that we're going to show you from the straight position here is if I go to stretch my hamstring, this is usually a pretty solid position for us, okay, going straight up here. Another really awesome position, though, is if I come across, okay? But what ends up happening when I come across, and now I'm getting more of my lateral hamstring, feel it right away, if I go across and I just start to let myself rotate through my hip position, now my low back, now I'm actually moving through the tissue of my low back, and I'm not getting as much stretch as I want from the hamstring, okay? Not only am I not getting as much stretch from the hamstring, but I'm actually mobilizing and moving the low back segment, which I actually want to be relatively stable through in order to prevent injury. Okay, so what that looks like, here's straight on hip flexor stretch, which is perfect. But then when I come across, I'm actually thinking about, can I keep my hip neutral to the ceiling? Okay, squared up to the ceiling. And then that's about as much as I need to go. And I have this massive stretch in a good way, tension line on that lateral hamstring. Okay, so again, just another very common mistake that people make when they try to stretch their hamstrings in different paths, which is great. is they actually end up moving at their low back or the whole hip complex itself. Okay, and the last one I want to go through today is now an upper body one, and this is for the pec. Okay, so a lot of us, we will find some stiffness in that pec line, the chest line. And it's because a lot of our life takes place in front of us. So whether we're, us here at TIW, we're coaches, we're usually coaching in front of us. Okay, if we are sitting at a desk or if we're a student or anything like that, we're usually over ourselves. So we get, again, very stiff, very tight in the anterior aspect of our chest, which is pec major, pec minor. Okay. A great stretch for that is something that we use here, which we call the 90-90 stretch or 90-90 pec mobility. And what that's going to be is you're going to get a station surface here. You're going to come at 90 degrees at your shoulder, 90 degrees at your elbow. So there's the 90-90. And we usually drop our inside foot back a little bit. And then what I want to do is I want to rotate slightly away from that. And now I'm getting this nice little stretch mobility through that pec line. So we can go in and out of that. Okay. And that's appropriate. Unfortunately, what ends up happening a lot of times is as we do so, we end up arching the back and we actually end up moving through the back more than we are through our pec line. Okay, so what that looks like, I'll actually show you from sideways position more so, is if I'm here and I go to mobilize away, but I end up just kind of arching my back and twisting off this. Now I'm getting more movement from my back. I'm going to create excess movement around the back, which can actually create more pain and issue. And I'm not getting as much of a stretch through that pec that I want. Okay, so again, the takeaway here, guys, is know the region that you're trying to stretch out, know how to stabilize the rest of the region around that in order to get the most beneficial stretch from the tissue we're actually trying to attack. Because if not, if I'm going to stretch and I stretch through and I move through the wrong regions, I'm actually likely going to create more issues at those regions. Typically, again, those regions end up being the low back, the hip itself, things that we aren't trying to really move around. We actually want to be pretty stable around, and we actually end up moving through those as we're going for these excessive stretches. Okay, again, this can happen just from regular stretches like we have here, or when we get into some more complex stretches, something like that you might see in yoga practices or something like that. If we don't truly understand where we're trying to get the motion from, we'll likely be doing, again, more harm than good. Okay, so take those principles. You can use those 3 stretches that we just went through, 3 mobilities that we went through, and take those principles and apply them to every stretch or mobility that you're going for from here, and you'll actually have a more pain-free, more optimally performed body coming from that, right? And then that's when we can actually, train hard, move well, and live athletic.